We are back on the show, all about small business, jobs, and entrepreneurship. Remember, you can always get on any podcast app, subscribe, rate, review, and share. Just search for Get Down to Business so you don't miss a single episode. I am so excited for this conversation. I am thrilled to be joined by a tech company builder and marketing consultant, and that's Mark Donnigan. Mark designs and executes marketing programs and go-to-market strategies to establish and grow markets for disruptive innovation startup companies. And Mark is a transformative business-to-business marketing and business leader and understands what's required to succeed in today's winner-take-all market. And that's why we wanted to bring him onto the program. Mark Donnigan, welcome to the show.
Hey, it's great to be here. Thanks for the invitation. I love getting down to business, so let's do it.
I know you do. Absolutely. You are a revenue-first marketer, and you've raised a lot of money. You've produced a lot of money. That's great. Mark, I always love to get to know the person behind the microphone. Tell our listeners a little bit about yourself and how you became so passionate about this work.
Yeah. Well, when I was 12 years old, one of my uncles, gave me a book on computer programming. Now I'm going to date myself a bit, but it was talking about this new language called BASIC. So, as a 12-year-old, I could easily wrap my head around that. So, it just blew my mind that I could, write code and make a computer do something. So, found myself spending, nights in my school's math department where the Apple II, and taught myself programming and, really, really had a great time. It was a foregone conclusion that, when I went off to college, university, that I would go into computer science program, which I did. But after a couple of years, I realized that my real passion was not actually making computers work. It was playing music. So dropped out of that program, went to music school, dreams of being a rock star, all the usual motivations. Found out that, poor starving musician, that's not exactly the life I wanted. So that brings me to business. And, along the way, I had been selling computers at an Apple, they didn't have Apple stores back then, but the independent resellers. And, just started working my way up. How it is, you kind of get started and one thing leads to another. And next thing you know, you've got 30 sellers working for you and, you're doing $40 million of revenue and, that sort of thing. But along the way, the connection to marketing is, along the way, I observed that marketing was like this rocket fuel that you could add. Yeah. And when you're a seller, you're always looking for, that extra push, right? And often I was in environments where maybe marketing wasn't what I thought it should be or what it could be. So, just out of selfish ambition, not because I was trying to become a marketer, but I'm like, hey, I want some extra rocket fuel on my sales and on my team's sales. And so, it led me down a path to becoming a student of marketing. And, then eventually I found myself doing more, strategy and market development. And then I started, carrying the title of, VP of marketing, CMO, that sort of thing. And, you look back and you say, oh yeah, I architected my career path. In reality, there's some serendipity along the way, but
for sure,
that's how I got to where I am. So that's why the revenue first marketer is a big deal.
Absolutely. And now growth stage marketing, which really is the perfect name because you've really, as I mentioned in the intro, you've produced 500 million plus in revenue for the companies that you've worked with, which is huge. And I love, Mark, what you've been saying of balancing that marketing, business, technology, aptitude. Really, really impressive. So we are all about, as you said before, getting down to business. Many of our listeners are from the small business world. They hear marketing and they're like, that's what those large companies do. But one of the things you talk about a lot.
Afford it.
Yeah, but you talk about all the time is sometimes, being really, really nimble, operating on a shoestring budget. And I know, Mark, you believe that you can accomplish a lot. So let's get down to it. How is that possible?
Yeah, absolutely. I truly believe that. And, I do primarily work with startups, which by the way, some startups are actually smaller than than a local business. Somebody that has a reasonably good size landscaping firm, just to pull that out as an example, they might have 30, 40, 50 people working for them, landscapers out in the field. Well, some of the startups, they've got 25 or 30 people. So it's not, just because they're in technology and maybe they even raised a lot of money doesn't necessarily mean, you've got a lot of people. And it doesn't always mean that there's money just flowing down the street, for things like marketing. So the scrappy side of marketing is really interesting because 10, 15 years ago, certainly like 20 years ago, there was a lot more in marketing that you had to pay to play. And, whether that was literally buying ads or, paying for a booth at a trade show or, it looked different ways depending on the market you're in, whether you're selling to consumers, whether you're selling to business. But really everything going digital and on social and, websites through Google, et cetera, it really has flattened. Now, it doesn't mean everything's free. Still, there's, some platforms you just have to pay to get exposure, but there is so much that we can do that doesn't have to cost a lot of money. It's going to cost a little money, but not a lot. And, we can talk about some of the specific tactics, but
I can't wait
I think
to get
that's
into it. We're going to continue our conversation with Mark Donnigan in just a couple of minutes. But leveraging every tool that we have is something that you and your team, Growth Stage Marketing, he's a virtual chief marketing officer and business consultant, excited to get down to business and continue talking about those nuts and bolts, how you can put it into action in the weeks and months ahead. We'll be back with Mark Donnigan in a moment. Back on the show, all about small business, jobs, and entrepreneurship. I'm continuing our conversation with today's guest, Mark Donnigan, who builds technology companies as a virtual chief marketing officer and business consultant since starting his career as a seller and advancing sales leadership. Mark is a revenue-first marketer who has produced $500 million plus in revenue and enterprise value for the companies he's worked with. Mark, we were just talking about, before the break, we were talking about some of the ways that even small business owners tuning into this program can get after it. Mark, I'm going to turn it over to you. Give us the tips, maybe not all the secrets. We'll get people in touch with you, but tell us what our listeners need to know.
Yeah. Well, so number one, here is the secret. So whether you're a small business, whether you sell, and I'm going to primarily focus on business to business, but business to consumer, it can work very similarly. The first thing that most people miss is they don't know exactly who their buyer is and where their buyer hangs out. And let me explain this. The buyer is not just, the whole universe that you could sell to. The buyer is a very narrow group. It might actually be a very small number of companies, individuals, et cetera, who have a need. They're looking for a solution that you provide. Okay, so they have that problem. They're looking for that solution. And it is amazing to me how many companies fall into sort of the trap of saying, well, but, we just want to reach everybody because then more people will know about us. And that's, it's almost like increasing my odds of success. It doesn't work that way. And so the first thing is to get very, very specific on what is the problem that we solve, who can benefit from that, and where can I reach those people? Okay. If you start there, all of a sudden you say, well, you know what? Those people, meaning that buyer cohort, if you think of it that way, these buyers, they tend to go to these industry conferences, or they tend to hang out in these online forums or these online communities, or, they get their information through this other channel. And then what you do is you just simply go to those channels, you go to those conferences, you go to those, wherever those buyers hang out, and you just start conversations. Sounds so simple, and yet so few companies actually do that. And a lot of times it's just showing up in those communities, so you might say, but Mark, I don't have a budget for a trade show booth at the conference. You don't need a budget. Buy a ticket and just walk around and spark conversations. And it is amazing how quote unquote serendipity / luck happens. And that's one way to get really, really scrappy.
And ultimately, that's what we want to do, especially as we have this conversation at the end of the year, getting close to New Year's. Everybody's looking for what's that new strategy, and some of these things are so obvious. And that's what you do is really helping to give that consulting and that advice, even small companies. So, Mark, I know our listeners have a lot of questions for you, and will want to follow your podcast and follow the writings that you have. How can people get in touch with you?
Yeah, I have a lot of tremendous resources, especially if you are in the technology space and if you're selling predominantly B2B. Go to growthstage.marketing. So my website, again, it's growthstage.marketing. And everything's free. You can go and click around. I've got, other podcast interviews I've done, just a lot of tremendous resources that, I think will be very beneficial.
Absolutely. And best of all, so much of this advice is free. The conversation can't hurt anybody. And certainly I would encourage everybody as we wrap up this program, set out your New Year's resolution, set out your goals for how you are going to ensure your company, your enterprise, your entrepreneurial venture is staged for growth. And that's exactly what Mark Donnigan can do. Mark, thanks so much for joining us. Really appreciate having you on. That's a wrap for us here on the show, all about small business, jobs, and entrepreneurship. We'll be back on, of course, next Sunday at 6 p.m. right here on AM 560 The Answer. And wherever podcasts can be found, get on my website, syklein.com. Be sure to check out our sponsors, Tom Mirabali from healthplanchicago.com. Again, to success. Let's get down to business. We'll talk next Sunday at 6 p.m. right here on AM 560 The Answer.